planning and operation of a golf course, a country club, a home development, and a nature trail. The implementation of which needs to be environmentally friendly, taking into consideration several important natural resources and the future operations. On the property, there is a pond, a creek, a wetland, and a lake, all containing immense biodiversity and resources for humans and wildlife alike. In addition, there is the Pocono Lake, a deciduous hardwood forest, and rich topsoil, critical to maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem. The suggestions included in our plan will provide for fire protection, low-impact roads, and the breeding habitat in the hardwood growth, all maintaining the health and overall integrity of the ecosystem.
In planning, we tried to keep into consideration a few things. First, this area is a habitat to an endangered cerulean warbler, a key player in the ecosystem of this environment. Also, the fish pond is very important to the local economy and the local ecosystem, as both tourists and animals come to the pond for its resources. The forest here is important because it's the last remaining old growth stand in the Poconos, while providing a habitat for the endangered cerulean warbler and countless other vital species. The wetland is key in maintaining a healthy water system and habitat to diverse wildlife and flora. Finally, the topsoil, containing pine tuff, and hardwood leaf litter. It needs to stay in order for erosion control and an overall healthy forest.
Okay, in trying to minimize harm to these important aspects, it is necessary to consider the impact and disadvantages of the suggested developments. So starting off with the golf course, water is probably the biggest aspect that we need to keep in consideration, seeing as how that's a very important limiting factor, especially here on the desert, and golf courses take up a lot of it. Also, fertilizer and pesticide runoff cause eutrophication in the ecosystem and are definitely bad for the water table. Also, anytime you're clearing trees and its habitat reduction, especially considering that there's an endangered species there, and also that it's the last deciduous hardwood forest in the Poconos at least. Roads, while in the construction of the golf course, will cause erosion and will have runoff, pollutants runoff on the roads. Also, we thought it was important to include that the grass is non-native, and so we wanted to mitigate any unexpected consequences of that. So the country club, which is the next thing that they wanted us to consider, sewage is an aspect we need to consider. Also, again, land clearing and habitat loss. And then roof runoff also. For the housing development, there's going to be a lot more sewage, which can be a problem. The roads and sidewalks contribute to more runoff, more pollution, and also erosion. And again, tree clearing and habitat loss. And then also in some of our research before we even came to this venue, we found that 55% of rainfall turns into runoff in urban areas like this one would become. And that's opposed to the 15% of runoff in the natural ecosystem. So you can see where we're trying to aim in runoff-wise. And then also pet waste and pollutants on the lawns of the housing are important aspects to keep in consideration. And then the nature trail we thought might contribute to erosion, but all in all it's pretty much an eco-friendly thing. And then just in general, people tend to produce a lot of trash, which we need to address. And then also parking can be an issue, especially because of space and oil runoff. And then there's always the utilities, such as electricity and water. So, in conclusion, we've got quite a few problems, but we have quite a few solutions also.
So for our solutions, we put them in 3 stages of implementation. We have the planning, the building, and the maintenance. So for the planning, with our golf course and our country club, we put them together so that way we would have a minimum impact. We also put them next to a road, so that way there's less surface area for rain to fall on and then water to run off. The location, we tried to put it as far away from water as we could, and then the runoff will be downhill, so it'll go up into this area and not damage the water table as much. Also for fires, if there were to be a fire in this area, hopefully the river would act as a boundary so it wouldn't go into the new housing development in the pond. And the deciduous hardwood, we put it away from there so it wouldn't affect the endangered species living there, and so they could flourish. The housing, we put it below the pond so again it could run off this way, and it's far enough away from Poconos so that it wouldn't run into that. And we put it close to the pond so that way it has a nice aesthetic feel to it so people actually want to live there. Again, it's close to a main road that we put right here, so there's not a lot of surface area. And then again, it's also far enough from the streams so that it's not going to affect the water table. And it's far enough from the hardwood again. And then for the nature trail, we're going to try to design it so that it reduces erosion by angling it slightly so the water will flow into the water table and not so much into other areas we don't want it.
The second stage of our plan is the building process, in which we suggest that the golf course should be surrounded by French drains and swales. These swales will allow the water to infiltrate through the ground and replenish the water table. Blue fescue grass is the grass we chose to cover the golf course with. It's a kind of grass that is especially permeable, unlike any other species of grass. Rough the rough of the golf course acts as a infiltration gallery, which allows the water to again seep through the surface and go back down into the water table. Swales and parking lots as well. These swales will act as a permeable surface, mitigating the results of the runoff from the parking lot. Native landscaping, we'll xeriscape the area, so we'll be using a lot of native plants that don't soak up much water than non-native plants. We'll be using green roofing style. So we will have like green roof gardens, which make more biomass, so it reduces heating and cooling costs, as well as you can go up there and pick greens out of your own garden from the roof. At housing developments, we will be using pervious concrete around the driveways because this allows the water that washes off from the driveway to still stay on site and go into the water table. And again, at the housing development, we'll be using xeriscaping. This, again, allows you to not use a lot of water and stay very environmental.
The final implementation in our plan is maintenance, which includes day-to-day use. For the golf course, we would recommend that there be a rain catchment and gray water system from both the housing development and the country club to water the golf course since it uses so much water. Also, fertilizers, as we mentioned, cause eutrophication in the river and lakes. So we would recommend that organic fertilizers as well as fertilizer usage trainings be implemented so that there is not as much excess running into the stream. At the country club, we would suggest a low flow system so that it reduces the amount of water used by humans. And on top of that, we would have a timed irrigation system. That way, water is not being used when it doesn't have to be. And also, the gray water and rainwater system would also feed a drip irrigation system for the xeriscaping and the green roofs. And finally, at the housing development, we would highly stress an education program so that people are aware of the effects of non-point source pollution and how they also contribute to non-point source pollution, not just something that happens out in somewhere they don't know. And with that, things as simple as scooping up your pet's fecal waste it would decrease the amount of pollution going into these water systems so much, and it's something that every person can get into and get excited about. And as well, chemical fertilizers on lawns are a big problem. So we would suggest not using chemical fertilizers or any fertilizers at all by using xeriscaping. Native plants.
Oh my God.
Who would have guessed? Native plants would not need fertilizers or water that isn't already provided in this beautiful area. To summarize, our job was to evaluate a housing development, golf course, country club, and nature trail in the Poconos. We feel that through our three-stage implementation system, we have sufficiently addressed all of these issues. We'll now take the questions. Thank you for your time.
I really love the way you placed your development to where it would not cause runoff of non-point source pollutants. But in the Poconos, I don't know if I'm going to ask you about xeriscaping in a non-desert environment, because I'm not sure about that. But what about flooding? What if there was a flood? How would the housing development be protected from that pond and the stream, which are uphill from?
Could you give us a moment to
Yes.
That's an excellent question.
Very glad you asked.
Use a better word.
We have, yes. Something I suppose we didn't really think about that, but I think a really terrific solution to that would be to have a riparian buffer around Pocono Lake, so that you have a wetlands area that acts as, they say, the kidneys of the river system, so that if any pollution were to arrive there, it would filter out before it reached the lake, causing eutrophication or any other problems.
And also, it's important to note, we weren't giving a topographic map, so we don't really know the layout of this land, but we're hoping that the water travels this way. That means that hopefully, if there was going to be a flood, that the water would hopefully go around the housing development and go.
Well, you were saying that the runoff would be away from the stream, so I assumed that. And what I like is that you guys are considering the environment,
Right.
and then but as for political reasons, you're going to have to deal with people too, and laws
Also,
and regulations.
I think to address your question, I think when we were talking about runoff, we were talking about pollution runoff. So I mean, obviously the housing development is going to be a lot more less friendly than over here. But if it rains, the runoff will not go into the water here. So, but a flood, some water would go there. Most of it would probably, hopefully follow the stream.
If a riparian buffer were added, it would probably mitigate most of the pollution entering the water system.
Yeah, and maybe including willow pools and check dams to slow down the water and prevent velocity.
Decreased volume, decreased velocity, always the answer.
I was wondering about your silvicultural plan, maybe your fire hazard reduction and how you guys plan to mitigate that around the development. And you also mentioned some old growth and endangered species. Are there any conflicting objectives there between those three things?
Objectives. Okay, well, so what it had said in our little packet, I don't know whether you guys actually got to see that or not.
We read this area out.
Yeah, so what it was is there was a kind of warbler who lives in the trees around here. And what we were thinking is hopefully if there was going to be a fire that was going to be started, it would either be here or here, because this is where the people are. If it's a naturally caused fire, I don't think that we had anticipated to stop that. I think Smoky Bear is obvious.